Welcome back, everybody. In this video, I'm going to talk about cognitive walkthroughs. Cognitive walkthroughs are a formal method, a formal procedure for evaluating a user interface without users. And as we said in the introduction to this module, this is important because it gives you a chance as a design team to go through and find obvious errors before you take up valuable user time. Cognitive walkthroughs focus on first-time use. They focus on what happens when somebody sits down to use a system for the first time, not on expert use. Cognitive walkthroughs are task-oriented. They literally require you to define what tasks it is that you want to verify that your interface supports, and to create specific scenarios for how someone will do those tasks in this interface. And the fundamental question that you're trying to answer as you do a cognitive walkthrough is, will users be able to follow this scenario? And we often say, can you tell a believable story? Can you tell a story of why a user would be trying to do some things and that they would try to do things a certain way that you believe and that others also would be willing to believe? And in order to do this, you must be aware of user capabilities. What is the target user population for your interface? What do they know? What do they not know? What can they do? And so on. Now, cognitive walkthroughs were developed in the context of Don Norman's theory of how people use interfaces. We saw this in one of the earlier courses in this specialization, and I'm going to review this quickly. Don Norman proposed stages of actions that people go through as they're trying to do a goal-oriented task. So if you want to achieve a goal, you have to form an intention to act to achieve that goal. You have to figure out the actions you need to take in order to achieve that goal. And then you try carrying out those actions, and then you get feedback from the environment. You have to perceive, you have to notice and interpret what happened, and then evaluate your progress toward reaching your goal. So we also saw, this is review as well, that you can use the stages of action model as a guide for design. And we went through a number of questions you can ask yourself. So you can ask yourself, how easily can the user figure out what is this system for? What is its function? How easily can they figure out what actions are possible? How easily can they identify and carry out the appropriate action? How easily, after they've done an action, can they perceive and interpret what happened? Can they notice it? Can they figure out what it meant? And how easily can they tell whether they made progress toward a goal? So intuitively, by looking at these 7 stages of action, you can ask yourself a number of questions that can help you figure out if if your design will be usable. Now, the cognitive walkthrough procedure essentially is a specific, focused take on that. So it says, take an interface and take a walkthrough scenario. And then for every action, for every step in that scenario, you have to tell the story of why the user will do it. So you're sort of going to walk through the scenario step by step and try to understand, try to figure out whether the user can and will take the step. Now, there's 4 critical questions that you ask yourself at each step. You ask yourself, will users be trying to produce the right outcome? That is, does the user understand that this step is needed to reach their goal? Will users see the correct action they need to perform to produce the outcome? So the correct actual thing on the screen, a label, a button, whatever. And this is where the principle of visibility comes in that we've, again, talked about at length in previous courses in this specialization. Then, will users recognize that this is the right action they need to achieve the desired outcome, or might they select a different action instead? So this gets at, are labels clear, and are different labels and different controls like buttons, are they sufficiently distinct so that people won't get confused between them? And then will users understand the feedback? And so that is, if somebody performs what actually is the correct action, will they be able to tell that they made progress toward their intended outcome? So I'm going to go through a very simple example to illustrate each of these each of these steps or each of these questions you might ask yourself as you go through. And I'm going to imagine a very, very simple scenario, a simple task, saving a document in Microsoft PowerPoint. And this is, you might think, well, everybody knows that you have to save a document and knows how to do it. But in other cases, you don't need to save. So I use Google Docs a lot, and there save happens automatically. There's other systems I've used where save happens automatically. So if that's your only paradigm that you're used to, then needing to actually explicitly save is a new concept to you. So, if you're testing an interface that requires users to save their documents, the first question you might ask yourself is, will users be trying to produce the right outcome? That is, do they know they actually need explicitly to save the document? And then after that, you might ask, will users see the correct action they need to perform to produce the outcome? And I went into Microsoft PowerPoint, and as many of you no doubt are familiar, or are quite aware of, in order to save a document, you go to the File menu on the top, and then underneath that, one of the options is to save. Well, will they be able to find the save action? And then the next question is, will users recognize this is the action they need to take to achieve the correct outcome? And so, will they actually realize that the label SAVE, save, is the right thing to do? In this case, almost certainly, although maybe they might wonder why I don't press Save As. But in other cases, you might say, well, I'm not sure they would understand that this is the right label. And then finally, will users understand the feedback? Now, if you have used Microsoft Office products, and other systems do things like that, you get this quick micro feedback as you save a document. It took me a while to capture this, but basically it says PowerPoint is saving this document, and assuming all goes well, assuming you're not saving over a really slow network connection, this just goes up and then disappears very quickly. But the point is, if I wasn't familiar with this paradigm of explicitly saving, I might need good feedback, very visible feedback that let me know, yes, I have actually successfully saved the document. Now, other systems that I've used have some visible indicators to show whether the document is modified since it's last been saved. So that's another thing you can do to help people understand the state they're in. But that was a quick illustration of how you might go through and ask these 4 questions about a very simple step in a scenario, namely saving a document. So what do you need to do a walkthrough, to do a cognitive walkthrough, to do it well at least? You need a well-developed interface. And a paper prototype is fine. And indeed, one of the advantages is you can do a cognitive walkthrough at the paper prototype stage. But the prototype should be pretty complete. You don't want a single sketch that only illustrates one idea. And indeed, what you need your prototype to be complete enough to do is to support a number of task descriptions. So since it's task-oriented, you have to carefully define the tasks that you want to see if your interface will support. And of course, you can only test them if your interface in fact does support them. And then for each task, you need a walkthrough scenario, which is the specific set of steps you need to do in this interface to do this task. And then remember, we're telling a story, trying to craft a believable story that users will be able to carry out this scenario. So in order to do that, you need a clear understanding of who your users are, what their goals are, what their knowledge is, and so on. And of course, another concept we've talked about in an earlier course, personas, is a great way to capture that knowledge and make it available. Now, in addition, to do a walkthrough evaluation well, you need to be skeptical. And by that I mean you shouldn't assume that people will be able to see every label. You shouldn't assume people will know how to navigate through your menu structure. You have to say, realistically, will people be able to do this? And so, for example, in saving, finding out where the save command was in that menu structure, can I believe that people would be able to find that? Well, okay, I'll tell you, in the Windows OS world, file and save have been around for many, many years, and so it's pretty believable that people would be able to do that. Sometimes, though, the answer is no, I can't come up with a believable account that somebody would find this button or know that it was the right button. And then working together is also important. It's helpful for people to individually go through and walk through the steps, but after that you want to go through and compare your notes. Make sure everybody on your team has found the same things, see what things only some people have found, and then it's also a useful way to find out perhaps what is the most frequently occurring problems. So what can cognitive walkthroughs do for you? Well, as I said before, they can help you learn about the initial user experience. And again, if somebody comes to your system for the first time, they can't use it, they might never come back. And so that's important. They give you a focus. You can say, here are the N tasks, the 5 tasks I want to make sure my interface supports well. And cognitive walkthroughs let you go through and evaluate, does my interface support those tasks well? The procedure is easy to learn and pretty quick to do. And the core of it really is that it forces you to articulate assumptions about the knowledge and thought processes of your users. Do users understand how to carry out a task? Will users really see the right control, or is it kind of hidden? Will they understand that this is the right control, or will they have trouble distinguishing it from other controls? Will they understand labels and text on the screen? Will they understand the feedback they get? Now, as I alluded to earlier, another advantage is you can do this process early in the process with a low-fidelity prototype. And this is great because it's cheaper to detect problems early in the process and fix them before you've done a lot of implementation and then user testing. And finding problems often implicitly suggests a solution. So for example, if you say to yourself, I really have a hard time believing that somebody is going to notice this control that they need in order to implement this step. Well, what is the solution? Well, you have to make it more noticeable. You have to make it more visible. Now, there's some limits on cognitive walkthroughs as well. Or I should maybe even better say requirements. You have to understand users in order to do this. So you have to have done user research. The process focuses on first-time users. It really doesn't speak about habitual, routine, and expert use. You need other methods to make sure your design works well for that. It identifies problems, and it doesn't automatically produce solutions. I just said on the previous slide that once you find a problem, the type of solution you need is often clear, like I need to make this more visible. But what does that mean? How do you make it more visible? It's still up to you. It still requires design sense. And the procedure itself does not tell you how frequent or how severe problems that you found are. Maybe some problems you found have workarounds. Maybe there's other ways to do them. And that's where by working together, by having multiple people go through a walkthrough and compare notes, you start to be able to get at answers to this question. Well, that's it for this lecture. I gave you an overview and an introduction to cognitive walkthroughs, and that's it until next time.